Thank you everyone for joining us today. We're so glad you're here. Frank is amazing. We're very lucky here at Hamilton to know him. And you know, when you go through someone's bio and your jaw just keeps dropping like more and more to the floor, that was the case when I was looking up more information about Frank Baseman. He's the proprietor and printer of Base Press. He's also the creative director and principal of Baseman Design Associates, award-winning interdisciplinary graphic design, doing strategic design thinking, visual communication. He's been working in the graphic design profession for over 3 decades, professor in the visual design communication program at Thomas Jefferson University, and he's been teaching there since 1998 with graphic design courses. He served on the National Board of Directors of AIGA. He's been the founding chair of the steering committee for AIGA Design Education Community. Thank you, Frank. Design education is very important, and knowing that people are making it a priority is great. And also in 2008, you were awarded the AIGA Fellow Award for AIGA Philadelphia. I love your work. It's always colorful. It's always thought-provoking. We've been lucky to show it here at Hamilton, our new admissions exhibition. And earlier this year came and did a little like residency. He spent, was it a week or 2 here at Hamilton? And in 3 weeks, time is a construct. I really don't know what day it is anymore. And watching you work and being able to see the process was really exciting. So thank you for doing this ham hang today.
Thank you, Steph.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm gonna hand it over, and I'll do some fancy camera work on the backside, but thanks for being here.
Okay. So thank you guys. Thanks everybody for coming. This feels kind of weird to be, it's my first time doing a Zoom lecture. But first of all, and Steph and I have been chatting for several days over this stuff, but I sincerely want to thank Stephanie especially, but certainly the larger Hamilton, Jim, Peter, Bill, Tootsie, for all of your support really. So I'm coming to you live from my home office. I live in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. It's a northern suburb of Philadelphia. We're about 10 miles from Center City, Philadelphia. And I live in an old we live in an old Victorian twin built in 1895, which means that wall is the common wall with our neighbors. So all this work from home stuff, I've been doing it for a long time. I think I'm just so, I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here with you guys. I remember pretty distinctly when Stephanie asked me this summer when I was at Hamilton to do a hang. And at first I was like shocked because I didn't necessarily think I was all that worthy. I feel like I'm such a letterpress rookie, and I've only been printing for 4 years. But then I realized that we all have stories, so I've got plenty of stories to share. And it's also a great way to share the work. So with that share word, I'm going to share my screen. And we're going to get right to it with this. And can you see this, I hope?
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, cool.
And now it's full screen. Looks great.
All right. So this little ditty is in a few parts, and we'll try to get through it as timely as we can. So I said I live in Jenkintown, Pennsylvania. Originally, a little backstory, I was born in Philadelphia a long time ago. And I'm number 2 of 4 boys. And then my family moved around quite a lot when I was younger. My dad worked for Encyclopedia Britannica. He was in sales. And every time started door to door, actually. And every time he would do well and get promoted, we'd have to move to another place. So from Philadelphia to Syracuse, Syracuse to Cincinnati, again in Cincinnati, then to Detroit, again in Detroit, back to Chicago. And we moved back here when I was in 8th grade to the Philadelphia area. Both my parents were from Philadelphia. So I ended up going to Cheltenham High School, which was a very good high school back in the time, and had a very strong art department. But I didn't really know what I wanted to do when it came to going to college. I guess I should interrupt this and say that I'm in no particular order, as I like to say. I'm a husband, a father, but I'm also a graphic designer. And I'm, as Steph says, I'm the principal of Baseman Design Associates, which I see as a small design business. I don't really think of myself as a freelancer. I'm also a full-time professor at Thomas Jefferson University in the Visual Communication Design program. It's kind of a long title, but we were calling ourselves Graphic Design Communication. And that's also in Philadelphia. It's about 7 miles away, so my commute to that is about 20 minutes. So my day job is really as a professor, and I've been holding 2 full-time jobs with my studio and teaching. I'm in my 23rd year at what is now Thomas Jefferson University. And as I said earlier, I've been only printing for about 4 years under the name of Base Press. So I still feel like I'm very much a letterpress rookie. And I like to think of it as I practice the letterpress, or I play the letterpress. In the same way that my son practices his guitar or his bass, every time I do a run, every time I do a color, every time I print, I feel like I'm just practicing more and more. So as I said, I went to Cheltenham High School then, not knowing I had no idea what graphic design was, so it wasn't even in the purview to think about that. I decided to go to Penn State University. It's about 3.5, 4 hours from here. Felt like it was far enough away from home. And I remember vividly meeting with an upperclassman about registering for classes. And I remember him saying something like, well, what do you like? And I thought, well, I kind of like art and I kind of like French. And I was an undeclared liberal arts major for about 2.5 years, but took my first graphic design class in my fall of my sophomore year. And for whatever reason, it just hit every cylinder, from current events to, just being interested in lots of different things. And I've never really looked back. I'm still a practicing designer. And there was a letterpress at one point at Penn State, but I don't know that I ever touched it. And it's a whole nother long story about how I ended up going to grad school. I went right from undergrad to grad school at Tyler School of Art, which is, at the time, my family lived almost across the street from the school. I literally walked to school. And one of my brothers was going to school there too. So again, it's a long story, but I ended up going to grad school at Tyler. And that's where I discovered a letterpress. I think it must have been an SP15. It was certainly a cylinder press. And I printed with it for about 2 years, not every day or anything, but nobody else was using it. And it was funny that when I look back on it, when I was thinking to prepare this and what to talk about, their type selection was for shit, because maybe they had Times Roman in a run, but like, who would ever use Times Roman? And we made a lot of plates. So yeah, that's kind of how I got interested in letterpress, and that was a long time ago. But I've had a very long interest in it for a while. Cut to graduating from grad school, I worked in Philadelphia for 5 years, 2 different jobs. One of them was actually teaching back at Tyler for 2 years. But I just felt like I didn't feel at the time that I was ready to be a full-time professor. I didn't really feel like I had enough experience. So I got the cojones to try to see about New York and what I call the Frank Sinatra syndrome, to see if I could make it there, I could make it anywhere. And I ended up going to New York and working for another about 5 years, 5.5 years or so. And I've been back here. Our son was born back when we were here, and he's 26, so there you go. And I worked I was an art director at Philadelphia Magazine after we got back here. But my interest in getting to letterpress was, I really do blame it on the sabbatical. After teaching for 19 years at my university, and I realize it's a pleasure to have a sabbatical. Not everybody gets a chance to have one. And back in the way back days, if you were at an institution for 7 years, you might normally just automatically get a sabbatical. But nowadays, you really had to write a big proposal, and I was on the committees that reviewed these proposals. So I kind of knew what I was up against. And I always said that I wanted, quote unquote, that I wanted to retire and get a letterpress and print manifestos. I don't know if I'm printing manifestos. I look at them more as broadsides. So the sabbatical goals were pretty simple: to get back into letterpress printing, whatever that meant. Mind you, I had no press at that time. and didn't really even have access to a press when I was applying, and then make a body of work. And then I had this long time interest in the rebus. Whoops. Okay, there you go. So what's a rebus? A rebus is a noun. It's a representation of a word or phrase by pictures, symbols, etc., that suggests that word or phrase or its syllables. It's a piece of writing containing many such representations. And the noun is a rebuses, but I prefer to call them rebi. And what I mean by this is in the upper left corner, you see the I Heart New York logo designed by the legendary Milton Glaser from 1977. And sadly, Milton passed away earlier this summer on his 91st birthday, actually. And it's, you know, it's a symbol of a heart, but over time we understand that it's I Heart New York, I love New York. But directly below that is a version of the IBM logo by Paul Rand from 1981. It uses the image of an I, an image of a B, and then the M. So in my, you know, not that it's Frank's rules on rebuses, but it could represent the sound or the spelling. But the middle image is a peace poster for New York Peace Campaign by Robert Brownjohn from 1969. And it's PE, and then it uses an ace of spades. So in this case, it's the spelling that makes up the rebus. The upper right corner is a campaign that's still running, America Runs on Duncan, if you can see my cursor. So there's the state of the United States, America, a runner, the word on, and DD for Duncan. And then directly below that is one of my favorites. It's from a Princeton University parking lot, and it's an image of the musician Prince with the word ton. This is a bit more commonly what we think of as rebuses. And this is a print by Bown and Company from New York City from ages ago. And it was given to me by Jessica Spring, who, I'm sorry she couldn't make this talk because she's actually printing right now, but she said she'd watch the video, and there's the shout out to Jessica. And it was she sent it to me as part of a print swap during the pandemic in spring of 2020. So if you follow along, it says, once there was a boy who lived in a lighthouse. He hearted, or he loved, to read books. When he read, he left the boats, fish, crabs, and seagulls far behind. He went to new places. He saw new sights. Now this is interesting because it's just two eyes, or maybe glasses. But in the context, we understand it to mean he saw new sights. A train took him to the city where he watched a cobbler or a blacksmith shoe a horse. I'm not sure the proper name for someone who, I used to know what that word was. A sailor danced a jig, and a baseball player hit a home run. He dodged many carts delivering heavy barrels, mysterious trunks, and even ducks and pigs. He visited the Statue of Liberty, etc. So, interestingly enough, I've been working with rebuses for a while just because I'm drawn to them. I'm not sure why. Upper left is a moving card from 1988 when I moved to Hoboken. And it says, I moved, the cow is saying moo, moved to Hoboken. And actually it's a Jersey cow. And then when my girlfriend, now my wife, we moved to Brooklyn, to the right of that is we moved, same cow, same size. We moved to Brookline, so that's an image of Brooke Shields, who was popular back in the day. The lower left is a holiday card. I've been doing holiday cards for almost as long as the studio's been in operation. And they're mostly derived by playing up something with the year, as opposed to Christmas or Hanukkah. And that one says Tooth Owls and Tree from 2003. The lower right is riffing off of the Roman numerals MMXVI, which stands for 2016. And then one behind it was MMXVII for 2017. So I clearly did them as companion pieces, 1 year separated, and rarely do I have my holiday cards all lined up in advance. So when I started the sabbatical, and I guess I should say that the sabbatical was awarded in March of 2016, And I was supposed to take place in spring of 2017, so a whole year in advance. And here I was sitting on this knowing I was going to be on a sabbatical. So I just got down to working right away to see if I could build this body of work. And I was building it around the idea of trying to take well-known phrases or quotes and reinterpret them with images as rebuses. So this is a slide of what my research looks like. It started out as I say to the students, a stupid-ass Word document. But I would take these phrases like the upper right corner, to be or not to be, that is the question. And I would start to put brackets around images to come. So the number 2, when I've done these rebus things, I don't think I've ever typeset the word to or the word the. I use a lot of catchwords. Even the word for, I use the number 4. So to me, that's still an image to come. Then a be, an image of an or, the image of a not. And so that's where the highlighted areas, you can kind of see that. The one to the right of that, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. The one below that, this land is your land, this land was my land. I just looked at that as the potential for a cascading bunch of ampersands. And then the lower left is one that's pretty recent. Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So it starts with this, and I still have an ongoing document that I add to all the time. And sometimes it's quotes, phrases, lyrics from songs. And they also start with sketches. I sketch a lot in my sketchbook. They're not always the tightest sketches. They're sometimes pretty crude. The upper left is a sketch for the Lancaster Letterpress Fair that I did a print of. Right in the middle, you see the to be or not to be. It's funny, back then it says William Shakespeare, as if an image of a shake, like a milkshake, was going to come in there. But you do see the ear right there for Shakespeare. The upper right is something I did at Hamilton this summer when I did the do unto others. So sometimes they're scratchy, sometimes but they make sense to me to really kind of grab a concept or an idea. The one on the lower right, you are my sunshine, my only sunshine, you'll see that in a print coming later. The upper left here is the 50 states print that I did that Scott helped me with a lot of state cuts. Below that is Stop in the Name of Love, Before You Break My Heart. The one in the middle, bottom, is just a way to show a type specimen. The idea was maybe to use A to Z with that. And then you'll see the rain in Spain falls mainly on the plain one a little bit later too. The upper left here, Do You Swear to Tell the Truth? That's one that's fresh off the press. I'll show you that one too, that's coming. But sometimes they make sense to me. The one in the middle, This Land is Your Land, was I have this Gothic type. Its set width is very wide, but I didn't want to be restricted with that, so I let it begin to overlap on top of each other. And then the one on the upper right is my version for Tipoteca. So it starts with sketches, starts with an idea. So here's a timeline of the sabbatical. Summer 2016, I started designing. Right after I got this notice that the sabbatical was approved, I started reaching out to people that I knew had some facilities and asking, begging to see if I could use their facilities because I didn't know how this was going to roll. I sent out 2 initial emails, one to University of Pennsylvania because there's a place called the Common Press there. And my friend David Comberg was in charge of that. And then I also sent one to University of Delaware. Bill Deering was in charge of Raven Press, which we've heard of from Ray and Jill, because I'm sure Ray started Raven Press with Bill. And then Lindsay Schmidl also used that as the place where she started. Both places got back to me and were supportive, but Penn said something about, well, you have to contact so-and-so. And Bill Deering said right away, fine. So I remember going there in May just to see the press. I'd never seen it before, and really to shake his hand and kind of consummate the deal. And then I felt like, all right, well, maybe I can make this work. But I started building the body of work in the beginning of the summer of 2016. I also did my first trip to Hamilton to print, and I didn't know Steph and Jim at all. I had printed actually at the old building with my friend Dennis Ichiyama in summer of '06, I think is when I traced it back. But at that point, Hamilton had moved, Jim and Steph came on, and I retooled the sabbatical proposal from a sabbatical request to this is what I was gonna try to start doing. And now when I look back on it, it's probably crazy to go to the mecca of all meccas of letterpress to print. And I hadn't printed in like 10 years or so. But it was great, and it was a great experience. And we did a little bit of a swap. So I did an unpaid internship for about half the time. And Steph maybe will be pleased to know that I still organize all my type in the way that you guys organize the cases, and I proof all my type in the same way that you had me proofing stuff. And then I got to print, and you'll see some of that later on. So I ended up doing the artist, designer, printer in residence at Raven Press in the fall of 2016. And I started to print more regularly. I would go every Thursday because I would normally teach Monday, Wednesday, and sometimes Fridays. And then sometimes I would pull a double and I'd go Thursday and Friday. It was working in a community press area, although there weren't a lot of students. I barely met any students when I was printing there. And one of the draws, of course, was both of my children ended up graduating from UD. It's about an hour and a half from here. And at the time, both my kids were in school, so I could go and see them and hang out with them a little bit. They'd come over to the press. But that fall of 2016, knowing I was going to have this sabbatical ahead of time, I started gathering as much information as I could, meeting people, continuing the research and quest. That's when I really met Lindsay and Ray. I had met Ray and Jill before because we had taken students to Lead Graffiti. I met Craig Welsh, lots of people around this area. Alan Runfelt from Excelsior Press, who still to this day is like my guru and mentor in so many ways. And then I started finding, from Briar Press and looking around, I started finding that there were some Vandercook SP15s available. And at the time, there was about 4 of them available around not just this country, but in Canada as well. And I was humming and hawing, and I'm not the most spontaneous of people. I usually, when a decision like this, I rack my brain and it takes me a long time to come to a decision. But I'd always dreamed about having a press. And I think the pressure, that's why I blame it on the sabbatical, the pressure of the sabbatical allowed me to think maybe this was okay, even though it was a pretty big investment. So I ended up finding a press at Don Black Line Casting, and I dealt with Craig Black, who was a very, very lovely guy. May his soul rest in peace, and really kind, and he was so helpful. So I ended up renting a U-Haul, not to go pick up the press, really I went up to Toronto. I mean, I could see the press, but it was going to be delivered in like a couple weeks. But I picked out about 10 different typefaces in wood, and that was my first score of wood type. And on the way back, I stopped by John Barrett's Letterpress things in Massachusetts and got a cabinet with some cases and some knickknacks to start printing with. And then December 22nd, 2016 was the delivery and move-in. My wife ended up naming her Vanessa. Her name is Vanessa the Pressa. Spring 2017 was the sabbatical proper. I did some traveling to Glasgow and Tibateca. And then spring 2017 was continuing printing, designing and launching 2 websites, and then a solo exhibition at Penn State. So upper left is where this is the view of what my computer looks like in my office space here. It's a great space to work in. And even though I've got a bulletin board, I end up putting stuff down on the floor. It's the best way for me to look at the big picture. And you can see a little bit closely, but there's the to be or not to be print. These are all inkjets. I did not scan any type because I didn't have any type at this point. Some of it was digital approximations of type that I thought I would try to look for. And you can see I'm using a lot of what I call the sort of vernacular imagery of old engravings, old printing cuts, which I've been drawn to, I think, my whole entire career. Not just because they're copyright free at this point, so there's no issues with that, but I felt that it went well with the kind of way I was working with them. So initially, if I wanted to size them a certain size, I would do that in my layout, and then I found Owasso Graphic Arts in Owasso, Michigan. It's kind of queer to me that I find these images in a book, I scan it, and somebody engraved it at one point out of wood or metal. But here I am scanning it, changing its size, and then I end up making a PDF, sending it electronically, and then about 6 days later, I get these wood-mounted letterpress plates. This is a shot of the workspace in Hamilton that I used that summer of 2016, and that's the SP15, which I probably printed on when I was there 2 months ago. The space has been reconfigured a little bit, and you can see there's this big, huge 2B on the press there in red, and that was being used for one of the prints. And then in the middle here, lower middle, is a Vandercook 2215 from Raven Press. Raven Press was a great facility. I'm grateful that I had that chance to really practice there. They had 2 great presses. To the lower right is what a lot of the wood type looked like. I mean, when I first got there, I was like a kid in a candy store looking at all these cabinets, and you'd open up the cases and you'd see this amazing type, but you could barely spell your name. It was mostly made out of odd sorts. And shout out, because I can see it, Tom, I didn't want to go with the ransom note look or shtick that we know of is a very letterpress way of going. You know, almost, you can see the work above was built on this idea of really spelling things out. So then I was scratching my head like, I can use the facility and I can use some of the characters, but I can't really spell stuff out. So that's what led to the concept of getting my own press. And really, I felt for the longest time that I was chasing a dream, and I was kind of allowing myself the liberty to do that. So upper left is my daughter and I. The press was delivered in a crate and dropped right off in the front of our house. And then, like, how the heck am I going to get it inside? So I called Paul Brubaker from Lancaster and his Merry Men. And I remember that they asked me when they were almost there, well, is there a Home Depot or a Lowe's nearby? And I'm like, why? And they needed to buy big plywood so that they could jack the press up. I asked my neighbors if we could, we don't have a driveway, so I asked the neighbors if we could use their driveway. And they'd bring it up the driveway, then you'd put it on a piece of wood, and then they'd move to the next piece of wood. We have a huge oak tree in the front yard. And the green porch there is where we live. So they moved it around the front of the house, then around to the side. It's funny, when I look at this picture, I see how blue the rollers are, and they don't look like that anymore, but brand new rollers. And then they took the cylinder off and the stops off, and of course the paper tray. And that's what it looks like. We have what they're called Bilko doors. I call them Dorothy doors. And that's access to the basement in the back of the house. There's 1 cement step and about 8 wooden steps. And all these people I was talking to, I couldn't tell if they were, trying to sell me a bunch of goods or what, but, oh yeah, we've moved presses in tighter spaces than that. We've moved them in 3rd floor walk-ups and stuff. And at the end of the day, the press made it by just like an inch. And it's a good thing they brought a come-along. I didn't even know what a come-along was, but it's this cloth, this rope that they could wrap around the press bed with a winch, and they could change the angle just slightly. And then Vanessa the presser was slid into her position into the basement, and she has not moved ever since. And you can barely see it, but where my cursor is, that's the entrance to the basement from the back. That's my first cabinet. And this was the first day. We printed First Compressions, Vanessa the Pressa, and Steph, I was proofing my type on 8.5 by 11s. Scott later thanked me for proofing my type, and that's when we named her Vanessa the Pressa.
I love it. Moving a press is always an experience. It looks great down there.
Knowing that when Steph and I were doing this testing, that our reception down in the basement is really awful, so I'd love to be able to show you guys and literally walk downstairs and show you what the press looks like. So this is from this week, and you can see this is the whole truth print in progress. I think, I forget what color we had on press, but the black is down, the copper is down, and the sort of mustard yellow. So I forget exactly what color I was going to next. But this is essentially what things look like now. I have I have 3 cabinets. 2 of them are full, mostly with wood, but a certain amount of metal. And you can see the 50 states print right there in the corner. So I actually lean over the press a lot. This is my spacing material right in front here, and it's organized, by picas, etc. So during the sabbatical, upper left, during the sabbatical, my daughter was studying abroad in London, and I have a brother that lives in London. So my wife and I took a trip over to see our daughter, and then we traveled around a little bit. And then I have friends. We have a great relationship with Glasgow School of Art. So, and I know they have a press. So I went there, and it's kind of crazy. I mean, I know I'm not the itinerant printer like Chris was or is, but I went to Europe with this portfolio with paper, and I was lugging this around Europe to bring my own paper. But I did, a few days in Glasgow, and those are some of the pieces on the upper left. And the upper right is me with Sandro and Daniele and Leonardo, I think is his name. And one of the great things about when I was making plans with Tipoteca, Sandro asked me if I like children. And I'm like, well, yeah, I've got 2 kids. And like, why? And as it turns out, every day I was there, Sandro would give a tour of the whole museum, from not just printing history, but typography and lettering and things. And the kids, they were all elementary age kids. They would all get a chance to set their name in metal type. And Daniele would set them up and imprint them on a piece. They always kept the red on the press. I don't know if they ever washed it up. And to hear the squeals of delight of these kids, to see their name in print, was just great. And squeals in any language, you can tell what was going on. And I would work right next to them. I couldn't understand anything they were saying, but it was quite lovely. And then on the lower right is a lockup of some of the things from Tipoteca. So this is ultimately what the project started to look like. And along the way, it even had a title. So this is the title print, rebus, quotes, and other typographic explorations. The typographic explorations allowed me to do some other things that weren't necessarily rebus quotes. The one on the right is essentially, there were 2 of them that were like the bellwether prints. That too is from an old book on wood type, and it was made into a letterpress plate. I have no idea what typeface it is. But to be or not to be, that is the question. I've had that hat in my collection for a long time. And there's Shakespeare, and my daughter's the one who pointed out that there's an E on the end of Shakespeare, so I had to typeset the metal type and allow for that space for the E to fall into. The metal type is 30-point Bodoni italic, I think it is. And then on the left is a bird in the hand is worth 2 in the bush, and that got into the first new impressions. So this is kind of what the stuff started to look like. This is what I call a reader statement for the whole project, and I will read with you. Dear reader, I have been fascinated with rebuses ever since I can remember. I learned to read as man, or many of us did when we first encountered words and images coming together to make a sort of visual puzzle. While studying graphic design at Penn State, I saw a professor write a phrase on the blackboard that has stayed with me for my entire career. Visual plus verbal equals message. Perhaps that began my more formal fascination with those fantastic rebuses. And to me, the sabbatical kind of culminated with an exhibition at Penn State. I hadn't had a solo exhibition in like 30 years since grad school. And the letterpress work took like the big hero wall, and then it also had pieces from my studio. And it was an incredible sense of accomplishment. Nobody also made me do the websites, but I also knew that that was the best way to share the work. So I paused in the printing during the summer. And I also couldn't do a website for the letterpress stuff without updating my studio site. So I actually built them. They're built on the same architecture, same typography. I actually got kind of a 2-for-1 special from the developer. But we launched Baseman Design Associates site and Base Press. And that was, the exhibition at Penn State was fall 2017. And then it might sound weird, but I kind of went through post-sabbatical stress disorder when I went back to school. It actually felt great to be back in the classroom. But could I keep this going? How much was the printing going to affect me? There was a time where I wondered, am I printing more because I'm designing less? Or am I slow up here because I've been printing more? And I would wonder about that all the time, but I absolutely see the printing, the letterpress work as an extension of my overall work, and I don't really draw a line in the sand with it. This is also a shot from the Penn State show. And you can see that there's quite a few just explorations, abstract moves just to practice printing, and then a bunch of the Rebus quotes in there too. The following year, I ended up having a show back at UD at University of Delaware, and I just kept adding to the body of work. This was a presentation to a type class, which was quite fun, and talking about the work. When I've had these exhibitions, I've always done a lecture or a studio, like a gallery talk. And then I was asked to have one at Marywood University in spring of 2019. So again, I just kept adding to the body. And I was supposed to actually have 2 exhibitions, one which would have been in the fall right now at Montgomery County Community College. But because of COVID and the pandemic, and they've gone completely online, we paused that one. And I was supposed to have one at Harrisburg Area Community College in January of 2021. That's also on pause. But you can kind of see behind me, there's some frame pieces, and that was meant for shows to come. So this is a better view of some of what the work looked like from Tipa Tech. I only printed there for 3 days. So some of the time just takes looking through the cases and cases of type and making notes where you got them so you could put them back properly. Scott, of course, go ahead.
Oh, and well, I just wanted to let you know also, looking at time, we're at about 12:40, just so you know.
Oh, okay, all right. I'm gonna go faster. So this is, you'll see this one, the You Can Fool All the People. There's the Rain in Spain one. Here's the This Land Is Your Land with this cascading ampersands. Most of this stuff was built around most of the type being black, and then the highlight colors just kind of adding flavor to it. This is the sketch you saw earlier. This Land Is Your Land, and the Gothic type that was so wide that I wanted to overlap. I'm gonna go a little faster now. So then let's stop sharing this and get to, so I lay out a lot of my projects ahead of time using the computer. I proof the type, I scan it, I lay out working in InDesign, I then import scan type as image, I use multiply to allow for overlappage and transparency, and this allows me to have a working layout like a blue line proof. So let's stop sharing this and wait. Let's share back to desktop. Wait, let's get out of, sorry. Get out of that and back to this. Can you see this? I hope so, yes?
Yeah, we can see InDesign. Looks good.
So this is how, I'm showing you the all the type boxes and everything. So I import the type, and when it's imported in InDesign, you go to Window, Effects, it normally comes up as normal, but if you go to multiply, it starts to become transparent. And if I also show my colors, swatches, whoops, color, swatches, I can change the color of this type very easily by just going like this. Come on, yeah. And that will allow you to see it with the transparency that we love in letterpress printing. So I actually end up laying out all these suckers, most of them, just like this. And it builds like that. Then I print and proof mostly in black and white, then crappy inkjets, and I go like that to the press. So this shows you a little bit of some of the pieces that you'll see. I'm gonna stop sharing this guy and go back to this. All right, so the rest of the stuff I'm gonna show you is stuff I've done since COVID. You could ask me why, I'm not really sure, but I decided to take on some type specimens of type that I have in the collection. And you know, the one in the middle is kind of, it started out as a very formal way of showing the Bedoni bold, but then I allowed the lowercase letters to just come in here and stamp all over. The one on the left is a work and turn where I did the A to Z. And the one on the right there is the print of what you saw, you just saw the InDesign document. And then I was able to go to Hamilton for 3 weeks this summer. I applied for a grant from school. I got what's called a faculty completion grant, and it was ostensibly to help with funding for the exhibitions that were going to come along. And work that I would do at Hamilton would eventually get into the exhibitions. So these were my cut and paste layouts. It was great that I didn't touch the computer for 3 weeks, but I kind of proof type and this is the layouts that I would work with. And let's switch now, Steph, to go to the phone. So I have to turn the volume down here, I think, right?
Yep. And stop your share. And then he's just going to go over to the other computer, to his camera, and we're going to spotlight it when he gets over there.
You can see? Cool, all right. So at the beginning of COVID, you know, this term social distancing. So I ended up doing these quick pieces, printing is my salvation and printing is my form of social distancing, just because I could. And a friend of mine asked me to do a piece, almost like a thank you note to first responders. And this phrase, we are all in this together. I tend to think in multiples. Sometimes when I'm really printing, I might have 3 or 4 or 5 prints that are active. And I might have one color on the press and then just switch prints. But in this case, I solved it more than one way. And I ended up giving these out to a lot of my neighbors on the street. This was no shoes, no shirt, no mask, no service. And print more, think less, and make more, think less. Not so much that I don't give a lot of thought to what I'm printing, but not trying to worry about how much I love it or not. It's a little hard to see, but this is black on black, and this is a folio. I got the idea actually from Dennis Uchiyama to house the prints in a folio format. And it's black on black as a kind of title for the Rebus Quotes project. I did this transparent overlay. The Rebus Quotes and Other Typographic Explorations project brings together 2 of my favorite long-term interests, Rebuses, etc. And a lot of people helped along the way in design, letterpress, and friends and family, Glasgow, Hamilton, and I ended up shipping prints to everybody on this list. This is the title page, which I think you can see okay. Here's the to be or not to be print. And this is the other bellwether one, the acts not what your country can do for you, but acts what you can do for your country. There is the bird in hand and rain in Spain. I'm going a little more quickly so we can get through this. This is an updated folio where I just did a collaging of base press. So it's 13 by 20. This goes through the press. This is blank back here. And I used book cloth to bring them together. And then I updated the transparent sheet, had fun with different logos. Baseman, get it? And then here's you can fool all the people some of the time, some of the people all the time, but you cannot fool all the people all the time. And this is the layout that I used for it, which sometimes I adjust, as you can see. The folios come in several different colors sometimes. And then this is sort of more recent work. This is the Hey PA Vote. This is the layout with sketches and notes on it. And this is what the final print ended up looking like. This is small metal type. The outcome of the 2016 presidential election in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania was decided by less than 1%. Make your vote count. My favorite part of this is the Pennsylvania exclamation point. How are we doing for time, Steph?
Good, we're at 12:47, and
Okay.
actually we have a good question if you don't mind my asking here.
Yeah.
Sharon wants to know, when you do the digital overlays, do you find that the ink colors mix in a fairly predictable way once you're on press?
No, in fact, I'm going to jump. It's a good question. You can see that I don't even try to match colors from the inkjet to the printed piece. I mean, this looks more orange, but I call it school bus yellow. This is like a proof, like a blue line, and it really gets me there mostly for layout. And then I sometimes, even if this might say yellow, I've been known to change my mind when I get to press. And I'm not worried about how heinous these layouts look, because I know that the printed piece is going to look a lot better. I don't know if that helps any, but like even this, it's pretty ratty looking, and it doesn't matter how dense or not dense some of the type is. I know it's going to be much better when I get to press. This is the not everything that is faced can be changed, the James Baldwin print. And this is just showing you what I'm proofing. I'm using Make Ready sometimes to proof the type. I proof sometimes with several different typefaces in mind, so I can have ammunition when I get to the computer to lay it out. This is that type that Scott helped me with some of the missing characters. And I really thought that I wanted to make the whole thing out of this one typeface, but it wouldn't fit on press. And I think I'm skipping where, anyway, did I lose that one print? Yeah, I think I skipped that print. Anyway, I don't have the finished print right now. This is the one that's hot off the press. This is a sketch I did when I was at Hamilton this summer. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth? This is clearly their type, and I really didn't even proof it. I just winged it right there when I was there. When I got back, I proofed some of my own type. And again, it doesn't matter that it's red. I'll scan it grayscale and turn it into black. And this is literally hot off the press. I did the silver this morning. This is even me sketching along the way. I wanted to proof the bottom a little bit differently. This is the digital print that I'm going from. And you can see right here how much the color has shifted. But again, I'm more concerned with what it looks like as a print than what it ever looked like as a mock-up. But I just did the silver this morning, and I have one more. The word God down here will be done in silver as well. I've also been known to, like the black here I did at the head of the press, then I flipped the sheet to print this part because I feel like I can get more accurate with my positioning that way. All right, Steph, let's go back to the main computer, if that's okay.
Yeah, we can do that.
I think I have to mute this guy.
Mm-hmm. And leave the headphones plugged in. I do that trick as well, where you have to flip sometimes. You have to watch your registration, but yeah, you can get
Unmute
it
and
tighter.
turn volume up. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, Frank.
All right, cool. And we're almost done. Let's share screen and share, and then go. This is also from Hamilton. That's the yield from Hamilton. And thank you very much. So now we're done and we can do the questions.
Sweet.
Okay. I feel like I rambled. There's so much to cover.
No, it's good. And sometimes their questions are good because also when you showed your work, people can ask specific. So thank you. That was great.
You're welcome. I mean, I know what from watching some of these sessions, David Wolski was showing how he lays out using Photoshop. And I told this to the students the other day, I don't know if they believe me, that they're much swifter in Photoshop than I'll ever be. But I just feel comfortable in InDesign. I know I'm not the only person who's using a computer, and I know it sounds to us geezers, we say the computer's just a tool, and it clearly is a tool, but it's very, very helpful to me, and it's just the way I work. I've done plenty of workman sessions in my own press to kind of sketch and free up a little bit. I'm not a slave necessarily to the way of working, but this is kind of the way that I've been working.
Yeah, that's great. I use Illustrator. So, and you've got a couple other InDesign friends in the chat. So
okay. I'm not even going to check the chat, but
no, don't worry about it. I've been watching it for you. And I would say now is a good time for questions. And if you want to unmute and ask questions directly to Frank, it's a perfect time for that. If you'd rather put it in the chat, I will ask. So Tom Walker was making fun of us and saying, how old do you have to be to know what a blue line is?
Well, or do you even know what Clark Express is, dudes? So actually, it's funny because the other day the students literally asked me how old I was, and I rarely tell them, but somebody was referencing Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, and I was like, I remember I was a kid when that came out, and I saw it several times, and that led to, well, how old are you? Yeah, but it's also, I feel like it's almost like coming full circle. I've realized, well, when I started printing, at Raven Press, I just realized how much I just really love doing this. And it felt so comfortable, and I'm so grateful for many, many things. I know I'm very, very fortunate to be able to have the press, to be able to have a family that supports me in my obsessions. But I'm grateful and I'm appreciative. And I was saying this to Steph earlier that the community has been so supportive. Everybody I've approached has been so willing and open to share information. I see Dan Elliott there, and I really know you, dude, from Rocker Dan and Insta. I mean, I recognize you from oh yeah, that's the Dan I see at Waze Goose, but we've never really had a beer together yet, and we will. But and Jason, I've never met you either, but Genghis Kern is one of the best names I've ever heard of. So actually, as you know, my name is Baseman. I work in the basement, so the name Base Press just was short and sweet. I did a little bit of a typographic treatment, and then once I did it and got plates made, I stamped it on every corner, so I wouldn't change my mind about it.
Well, there were two good thoughts. One person loves your mark. There was a comment about that. And Veronica has a good question about that cut. She says, where do you get all of your art cuts? Are you making them or are they vintage?
I've made some myself. I forgot to say this earlier. I really think, I know that I should just come right out and say it. I came through graphic design through language. I guess it seems pretty obvious now. And it's obvious to me now, but when I was a kid, maybe not. I don't really think of myself as an illustrator. I've got lots of friends who are really talented illustrators, but I know I kind of came to graphic design through language and then thus typography. So I've had a long, long interest in type writ large. And like a lot of us, I toggle between analog and digital. So the simple answer is, I've made some of the images, but I've swiped more than I've made. And I get the cuts made. I have nothing wrong with polymer plates. I just don't have a base. And I figured it's actually, and for those of us that are printers, I love the restrictions that we have. I can't make it out of a bazillion typefaces that the kids these days have access to. I can only use the wood type, metal type that I have. And so if I have an ear made and it's 3 inches tall, I kind of work with that same ear. I'm reluctant. The only time when I made the I Heart Hamilton, I got an eye bigger and a heart bigger. But most of the time, I have a smaller size for that. So when I want cuts made, I get them made from Owasso, and they're wonderful to work with, and it's been great.
And I put that link over in the chat for Owasso. That's also where we get our plates. We've had to get a lot of copper because being next to the lake, the magnesium's oxidized pretty quickly.
Actually, that's interesting because my stuff started to oxidize as well, and they said that I should oil it and keep it in plastic bags. But you know, you're paying for the plates. I might start getting them in copper as well. But
it's a little more pricey, but we have found it to be worth it.
And I kind of
use it a lot.
I want them to last, and I know that I am building a collection of cuts. Any other questions would be great.
Yeah. Hey, Frank.
Yes, Scott.
I noticed, since I make about 14 of the Tipoteca Italian dashes based on the beautiful small print that Wolski gave me after his trip, it was so nice to see some other ones that have been made. Do most of their dashes, are they that big in terms of size? Because they asked for 50-line long ones when I was talking to them.
The ones I saw were the size you saw. It's almost the width of the press. It's not 15. To fit in my 13 by 20, so they're probably 12 inches wide.
Okay, yeah,
quite a bunch of them.
They were looking for 50-line ones that were really long, and they said David Wolski said a lot of theirs had deteriorated and crushed. So it's been amazing to see as I make them in Illustrator how beautiful the art is and how well designed they were. And the lovebirds have different height feet, so there's a slight hump I almost corrected.
I feel like in just 3 days that I was there, I was just barely scratching the surface of Tipoteca. And I dream about, Sandra and I are in pretty close, I forgot to show the Tipoteca print, but we're in pretty close contact. And I hope at some point to go back for a much longer time, like a month or 3, like a whole summer or something. I hope that that's in the future at some point where I could really have the time to explore. But to answer your question, they probably do have smaller ones, but I came across some wide ones for sure.
Ooh, we have a good question from Rebecca. I will let everyone know Frank offered to stick around for a little bit after, so we'll have you answer Rebecca's question. I'll do a little wrap up and then we'll stick around for some more questions if you guys have questions. But Rebecca wants to know, what paper are you printing on? I'm always love to know that.
Great question and good point. I will admit that I was interested in Lettra. I'm going to come backwards and answer it, but it's pretty pricey. I started, and again, I was just interested in a body of work. I call them broadsides. So first, what size? So 13 by 20, as you guys, a lot of you might know, is 1/4 of a parent sheet. It also, well, more importantly, it fits on a 15-inch press. I feel like I'm really maxing out the 20, which is sometimes why I'm printing at both ends for registration issues. So when I order, and I order maybe a few times a year, I get a boatload of paper, full-size parent sheets, and then I take it to a local printer who has a much bigger chopper, and I get what I call paper cuts. Strathmore letterpress cover, 111 pound, has a bit of a tooth to it, and I love the contrast, and Steph will also love to hear this. I used to print with more pressure. Now I'm backing off a little bit and using more ink, and it was Edwin at Glasgow, when he would look at my stuff, he'd say, "You're using too much pressure and not enough ink." So I'm learning so much stuff from people. But I still get a contrast between the paper surface and when you hit the wood type. So Strathmore letterpress cover, it came, because I'm fearful that they stopped making it, but it came in 4 colors. Ultimate white is kind of your white, blue, white. Soft white is what I still use. That's kind of the house sheet. It came in khaki and smoke gray. And those were the first two colors I kind of kicked off the island. And for a while there, I was ordering the soft white and the ultimate white almost evenly. And I've always loved Mohawk Superfine. It just doesn't have as much of a tooth to it, but it prints a lot cleaner. So I'm actually toggling between Mohawk Superfine, which is much smoother, and the Strathmore Letterpress cover. I like to have a tooth to it, so I would always go eggshell rather than smooth. But even the eggshell paper, if I showed it to you, it looks kind of smooth. But it also prints pretty darn cleanly. The runs I was doing this morning, I would pretty much start with the Superfine, and then when I got to the Strathmore, I would put a light piece of paper behind it because it needed a bit more packing. So that's mostly, for the folios, I mean, I'm kind of a Strathmore guy, but I would pretty much use Strathmore cover in multiple colors. The folios, I generally pick like 4 or 5 colors. I do like 200 of them at a time. And then I just, whenever I fulfill orders, I can pull, everybody gets a folio and a transparent sheet and then the print. That's just how I ship. And I ship with a backing board and with 16 by 20 U-line, lay flat for those that have received the prints. And they really ship pretty well that way.
Yeah, not to type your time, but if if someone wanted to buy some of your prints, I have a friend who saw your United States print and wants to buy 3 or 4 for his grandchildren. How do people buy your prints?
Well, I remember when you and I were having this conversation. When I first launched the press, the site, it was not e-commerceable, but since last fall, it is. So it's fully e-commerceable. Someone placed an order this morning. I know it works. Basepress.co, not com. Basepress.co, and I know Steph put it in the chat. So yeah, would love to sell them. I forgot to say this also earlier, and maybe it's just my circumstances, but when I started, I didn't want to put pressure, pun intended, on the press to really make a lot of money. I have 2 day jobs. This was an extension. I don't call it a hobby. It's not a hobby. It's work, but it's just as much play as work. But requests from you and other people, I decided to make the site e-commerceable, which meant going back to the developer and back to the design to adjust it. But it works now. It works beautifully now. Of course, some of the recent stuff, like we did photograph recently, but the the one that's the ink is still wet, that's not up there yet. So sometimes people ask about something they might have seen on Insta. It happened today where someone wanted to buy the vote poster and it's not on the press. So I say, buy something else and I'll swap it. And that works pretty well too.
That's a good way to make it work, right?
Yeah.
So I've put your website over on the side if anybody wants it. You can also get the States one here at Hamilton through New Impressions. And we're going to stick around if anybody wants to still ask questions. I do want to say thank you so much for doing this, Frank. I was taking notes.
It felt like it was 15 minutes.
It was so good. It was exactly what we like for a ham hand. So thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, of course.
Thanks, Frank.
Thanks, Jim. Good to see you.
You too.
Yep.